This webinar is about how health and wellness brands can adapt to the new rules of retail. And we are going to talk about shifting buyer expectations, what retailers really want to see, and what it takes for your brand to stand out on shelf today, whether that's in physical retail or on Amazon. And we will also touch on the D2C to retail transition, what's working, and how data-backed strategies can support product claims and strengthen your pitch to buyers. And in case you're new to Citruslabs, I'm Susanne Mitschke, CEO and co-founder, and Citruslabs is the leading provider of decentralized consumer research for brands. We conduct clinical trials and consumer studies for supplements, superfoods, cosmetics, pet health devices, and even household products to help brands make strong product claims that drive business growth. And if you're interested in running your own study, feel free to reach out at hello@citruslabs.com or visit our website at citruslabs.com. But enough about me. I am incredibly excited to host two powerhouse guests who bring deep insights into today's retail landscape. First up, Caroline Grace, a founder of Product and Prosper, who helps CPG brands become must-stock names in retail. She's an expert in everything from buyer relationships to merchandising strategy. And joining her is Hunter Stutz, founder of On3 and an Amazon expert who has helped generate over 300 million in sales by guiding brands to scale effectively on Amazon and beyond. They'll be answering your biggest questions on timing, the retail leap, what retail buyers are really looking for, how to manage channel conflict, and how clinical data can be used to elevate your retail pitch and justify premium shelf space. And before we dive in, there will be some time for Q&A as well. Please put your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll do our best to go through your questions later. All right, Hunter and Caroline, thank you so much for spending time with all of us today. And to warm up, could you just quickly introduce yourselves, starting with Caroline?
Sure. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you so much, Ben. It's so nice to meet you guys. And thank you everyone for attending. We're obviously in a very, very different landscape than we even were 6 months ago when it comes to retail. Even over the last 5 years, so much has shifted about how brands are scaling and entering new channels. There's a lot of conversation when it comes to omni-channel. So I'm excited to talk with Hunter and everyone here about what that looks like for you in particular, all the brands out there and strategists out there in the market. In our webinar here. I am the founder of Product and Prosper. I operate a suite of agencies that are really focused on building the strategic foundation brands need to scale into retail. My background's in branding, marketing, and sales, and in retail strategy in particular. And I'm really focused on helping brands understand when brands transition from being a D2C product to retail, the foundation that you need to build and the strategy you need to take and what you need to prove to buyers is very, very significantly different than just operating at a D2C level. And that's really what I'm focused on helping brands understand and navigate is how do you expand from a channel specific brand to an omni-channel brand that looks at retail as a strategic play to maybe an exit or scaling into the next level of their growth. So a little bit about me. I'm excited to chat with everyone. I obviously don't have all the answers and I'm not an Amazon expert, so I'd love to learn a little bit more about Hunter.
Wow, that was an intro. Yeah, so kind of like Caroline said, my whole background expertise is more on the e-com Amazon side of things, right? So very excited to talk more of that retail brick and mortar side of things today as well, right? And have those conversations of when is the right time to pull the trigger, if you're going from Amazon to retail or vice versa as well, right? So super excited for this conversation. And again, thanks to Suzanne and Ben for getting me roped into this. I'm the founder of On3. We're an Amazon consulting agency. I've helped brands in virtually every category that can be sold on Amazon. Like Suzanne said, I've helped attribute well over $300 million on Amazon. So I like to know, or I like to think I know what I'm doing a little bit. But as Caroline also said, I'm not perfect. There's always new things to be being learned, being said. So again, super excited for this conversation.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. And let's start with some, a fireside chat before we go into audience Q&A. So a topic I know is top of mind for many is how the landscape has shifted for D2C first brands who now want to enter retail. And Caroline, I would like to start with you because you work closely with brands as they prepare to enter retail. What are some of the clearest signals or patterns you've noticed that indicate a brand is ready to succeed on shelf?
Yeah, it's a complicated question because it becomes a question about what scale of retail, right? So there's generally kind of three levels of retail. So there's independent retail, there's regional chain retail, and then there's national level retail. And the numbers, the metrics, what you're looking for to scale into each level of retail is very, very different. Um, and it's different by category and it's different by product. And there's lots that goes into that question. At a bare minimum, there's three things that buyers are typically looking for from brands. They're looking for credibility, capability, and cash, ideally cash flow and cash potential. When it comes to credibility, they're typically looking for credibility in terms of, who are you as a founder? Do you have proof of traction on D2C in terms of sales proof, in terms of social proof, in terms of have you, been featured in any PR? Have you worked with any high profile influencers? Do you have reviews? Do you have, channel, do you have any social proof surrounding your credibility that shows that you are onto something as a brand and as a product line? The other thing that you need is capability. So buyers want to know that you are capable enough to supply the product and keep it in stock and be a really good partner for them as a buyer and as a relationship as you grow within the retail landscape. So you need proof of capability. Ways you can show that is, reorder rate over time from your current customers. Another way to show that is you do need to build a foundation of independent retailers or have a number of scale up retailers that you're working with that you've been in market with for about 6 to 12 months as you move into more of a national landscape. And then in terms of cash, right, retail's changed in one way because it's much more expensive than ever before. There are so many brands looking at retail as a way to diversify their channel strategy and as a way to hit ultimate scale within CPG. But you do need cash flow from other sources in order to support especially national level retail launches, or you need some sort of capital investment to support that level of launch. You also need to show cash potential, right? Cash potential, what I talk about when I mean that is category cash potential. So you need to show that you're going to add sales or, do better in sales perspective in the category, in a specific category for a retailer as you're entering that category. Ways to prove that is, you could use data syndicate data. You could use sales data from Amazon. You could use like data from other retailers. You could use data from your independent retailers and your chain retailers. Again, that's a very broad overview. There's also two different kinds of strategies when it comes to retail. There's kind of a top-down strategy. There's a bottom-up strategy. But my preferred strategy when it comes to retail is bottom-up. So what I mean by that is building a base first from D2C, but then you build a base of independence. You go slowly, strategically in the market. You choose really high-quality partners in the regional chain retail level, and then you go national chain. The other one is the top-down approach, which is you go launch hard and fast into a national level retailer. It's usually an exclusive launch. The brands that typically do best there are the ones that are celebrity backed or who have previously scaled a brand within CPG. So for example, look at Davy protein bars. They went, national pretty quickly, and that strategy worked for them because they had a lot of capital already invested in the marketing and the sales. Anyways, we could go so deep in here, but that's a very, very high level overview of strategically how we have to think about scaling into retail, whether you're a D2C brand, whether you're a brand just entering the market, and what buyers are looking for at every step of the way.
That makes sense. So, start small and then grow with, your brand as you have more sales. So start D2C, then you get like reviews and, some social proof, and then start with independent retailers, and then the next step would be regional. So does regional mean that, for example, if I want to get into Target, does that mean that I'm then getting into Targets in Southern California, for example, before I go to Target nationwide?
Yes, there's caveats to the strategies though, right? If you're a beverage brand, you're not going to want to take that approach because the margin difference on a beverage brand to ship is totally different than a shelf stable
Hmm.
brand. So if you're a pantry brand, yes, absolutely take the grow up approach. If you're a beverage brand, you're probably not going to be as, you know, heavy on the D2C side or even the Amazon side. You're going to want to go as fast as possible to the distributors and then into bigger retail. So it's like quite complex, but it really depends on the category, the product. There's different methods to scale different types of categories and different types of products.
That makes sense. And Hunter, let's bring Amazon into the mix. I am seeing a lot of brands, wanting to get into retail like Whole Foods, Sprouts, Yoan, Sephora, Nordstrom, but many also of the brands that I am using, they're not on Amazon. Do you know why that is? Do some brands just not get into Amazon because maybe there's some exclusivity stuff going on, or is Amazon just really hard to crack?
Yeah, I think like Caroline said, it's a complex conversation and answer, and it's a brand by brand question, right? But in reality, Amazon is a lot easier to get on than it is to get your
Hmm.
foot in the door any retailer, right? Regional, national, whatever it is. But you don't have somebody holding your hand to do that process, right? So you can get on Amazon a lot easier. But then that kind of leads to the part of the conversation where, I think we're actually going to talk about later as well, but why wouldn't brands want to get on Amazon? And I think Amazon has a well-deserved black eye for some reasons, right? Margins technically or usually get hit a little bit, right? Because Amazon has a lot of fees. People don't actually know what to do on Amazon, how to sell Amazon. Should I sell 3P? Should I sell 1P? Should I just sell to a reseller distributor? Things like that, right? So I think the reason why a lot of brands don't get on Amazon is a little bluntly a little bit of a fear, right? Fear that if they get on Amazon, it's going to cannibalize their D2C sales, or it's not going to help them get into the retail brick and mortar locations that they want to, right? When in reality, if we take a step back a little bit and look at, I'll call it the sales funnel for e-commerce for an omni-channel approach, Amazon is way more of a demand catcher than a demand creator, right? Versus your D2C sites versus even retail, they're a little bit more upper funnel and a lot more demand creators. And when I say demand, I mean like search volume and stuff like that on
Hmm.
Amazon. So it actually is beneficial to have both, right? And a Target customer might overlap slightly with an Amazon customer, but they're still two separate, distinct audience sets, right? Some people prefer only to shop on Amazon. Some people prefer only to buy in store, right? But I think the biggest thing that comes with Amazon as well is that proof of credibility, right? Even if somebody's physically holding a product in store, they can go to Amazon, see reviews, see what people like, see what people don't like. So again, maybe this is my opinion. I'm strongly opinionated about it, but they really do go hand in hand, I think a lot more than people want to realize.
I do that when I'm in a shop, and I like, oftentimes I'm getting drawn to a product because of packaging, and then
Sure.
I like the package, and then I go on Amazon and see if they sell on Amazon and what their reviews are. I'm definitely doing
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. Yep.
And similar question, as I asked Caroline, are there any signals that tell you that a specific brand will be successful on Amazon?
Yeah, I think Caroline actually took a good portion of my answer for that as well, right? but again, it's brand by brand, and you can use virtually any metric you want to from Amazon to help justify in a good way why you'd be a good fit to get into retail, right? But again, outside of the myriad of reasons, I think the two that usually come to mind are a little bit more high level, and not so Amazon specific, but they're supply chain and inventory and capital cash flow. Again, if you can't be consistently in stock on Amazon, it's kind of a well sure sign that you're going to struggle to stay in stock for on retail side as well, right? I think retail is a little bit known for placing bigger POs and faster, right? So if you don't have the supply chain capabilities to be able to maintain that, that's what I call a beige flag, not a red flag, not a green flag, but it's a beige flag, right? And then capital cash flow. Being able to keep in stock with Amazon obviously requires a lot of cash flow and forecasting and planning, right? But if you're going and adding in these additional channels, these additional brick and mortar locations, you're going to go from, for sake of conversation, from needing to hold 5,000 units of inventory to 10, 15, 20,000, right? And if you can't keep up with that cash flow and that capital need, then you're in for a rude awakening, right? But to give you more of an Amazon specific like KPI metric answer, I think conversion rate is probably a really good signifier to if you're ready to start expanding, right? Because especially in CPG, if you've got, because Amazon's competitive as well, right? Especially in the CPG space. And being e-commerce, like you're not in a store holding the bottle, holding the product, getting to touch it, feel it. It's probably not tasted in the store unless they've got samples or something, right? But e-commerce even less than brick and mortar, right? So if you got demand and the search volume and you have good conversion rates, then that's a pretty good sure sign that you've got capabilities and needs to be expanding upon just Amazon.
That's great. Yeah, I think conversion rate is all we care about, right? The people who are looking, are they buying?
Yeah.
Great. Well, Caroline, let's dig a little deeper into timing. How can brands actually create retail buyer interest? You already touched on a couple of things like social proof, and it's easier when you have a celebrity backing. But is there anything that retail buyers are really looking for in a brand in terms of, you know, metrics? Like if you have 200, 500 reviews, then they will look at your product. If you have sales of 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, then they will look at your product. Is there anything like that you can, put in a box and this is your toolkit for approaching retail buyers?
Yeah, you ask a really good question. Again, it comes down to credibility, capability, cash, right? But the specific numbers is going to be buyer dependent. Buyers are still, the personal preferences of buyers are still more than I think we want to acknowledge, still very much a determining factor for which brands and which products are given a shot on shelf, especially new brands and new products. So there's a lot of qualitative and quantitative metrics that you can look at, but again, it's really complex. I think the number one is velocity numbers. There's a difference between being able to convert and sell and have reorder rates on D2C and in retail. It's just a totally different landscape. It requires an entirely different foundation of your product, your packaging, your positioning, your pricing within a limited category set versus a more expansive category set like would be on Amazon. And so if you have data that you can both perform within a larger category set and larger competitive market, like on Amazon, with review numbers, traction over time, reorder rates, conversion rate, and you also have data that you can perform and convert within a limited category set within retail, right? Velocity, reorder rates from retailers, those are really kind of the primary numbers. Added sales to the category, The only problem with retail is that the reporting period is much slower. So you won't get a lot of that data unless you're self-calculating until 6, 12 months afterwards. So it has to be a much more slow and gradual approach up to retail. There's a lot of other things that buyers are looking for. I think one is accessibility of the market. So what I'm finding is that making the market more equitable and the CPG industry more equitable and more accessible for especially minority founders and otherwise, there are specific programs that can help support brands on that. So it doesn't have to just be data, right? It can also be about your personal story and who you are and why you're bringing this into the market. A lot of buyers will resonate very heavily with you and your purpose and your why as an entrepreneur. Think of them as investors. Yes, half of it is the numbers, but half of it is also, do they believe in you as a founder, right? So it's a very complicated question. It's really buyer dependent as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers some of it.
It does. And one thing I have seen specifically in Whole Foods is that some brands got listed in a lot of Whole Foods um, all over the country. And now I don't see them anymore. So that can also happen, right? Now, when I wanted to go back, buy something, and then I couldn't because they are not there anymore. And I asked, and then they were like, oh, yeah, we are not, we are not selling the specific brand anymore. So that can also happen, right? Once you are in retail.
Absolutely. Delisting is a very real possibility. I mean, on Amazon too. Hunter can probably talk about that more than I can. But yeah, I mean, this is a case for not scaling too fast, especially within big retail, because once you get there, you want to stay on shelf because it's very hard to get back on shelf unless you pretty much rebuilt the brand from scratch. But yeah, delisting is an unfortunate reality. There's a lot of different reasons that brands are delisted. The number one is you just don't have sell through and you're not hitting the velocity numbers. It is still a business that retailers are operating. And so they're looking at their margins, they're looking at the number of products sold over time. And so you still have to, as much as a founder or excuse me, a buyer might believe in you and your product, you still have to prove sales at the end of the day because those are the numbers that buyers are that's what their job depends on, are those specific numbers. Other delisting is you're out of stock for an extended amount of time. If you can't get the product in store and you can't keep it in stock, that's a pretty major issue for a retailer because that means no sales, right? The other reasons might be that the buyer changes over. So there's very important ways that you have to maintain or reintroduce your brand to new buyers, especially within Whole Foods. I know a number of companies that a few years ago were in Whole Foods and then they pivoted how they structure their buyer ecosystem, and now they're not on shelf. There's very strategic ways you have to maintain those relationships. But right, that's also the difficulty of retail is it's a lot less scalable because it's it's ultimate distribution, it's ultimate scale, but the way that you have to navigate the relationship with a buyer is still very much B2B. It's very much business, like relationship building, and that takes a lot of time. So yeah, it's an unfortunate reality, but the way to kind of bypass that is build a really good foundation, build demand into your product before you even launch on Amazon, before you even launch into retail. And you have to prove that over time.
And Hunter, is that similar to what you see on Amazon when someone delists on Amazon?
Yeah, I don't know if the, delist is the correct terminology to talk about it on Amazon, right? But the most common one is probably, again, like I mentioned earlier, being in stock, right? Because if you don't have inventory, there's no way to pre-sell on Amazon or anything like that, right? So if you don't have inventory available, whether it's FBA or FBM, so whether Amazon's fulfilling those orders or you're fulfilling those orders as a seller, you can't sell, right? And that's detrimental because we have to think about Amazon. Everything is algorithm based. So being out of stock for even a couple of hours, let alone a couple of months, is detrimental, right? And so it takes a lot longer to build back that momentum, that organic ranking, and that sales velocity from when you were out of stock. So, but there's also, if we get into it a little bit more, there's also things like product expiration, meaning that, brand A is selling product B, and, it really only had a run rate for a year or two, right? So on Amazon, you can still buy that product, but the seasonality, I guess we can call it, of that product is gone, right?
Mhm.
So as far as like delisting, that's kind of how it compares to the Amazon side of things. But there's always new competitors coming in. Again, the barrier to entry to get on Amazon is so easy. You just have to know what you're doing, right, to make sure that you're growing, scaling. And I think the hardest part with Amazon is you just don't know what you don't know, right? But yeah, I think that's kind of the relationship there.
And let's also talk a little bit about community. So Caroline, you mentioned, you should create a following around your product, right? And community is certainly a buzzword in CPG. And to both of you, do you think it's possible to create that similar same sense of community in retail and on Amazon? And how does consumer loyalty differ across channels? Hunter, I think on Amazon it's probably a little easier because a lot of my products that I buy on Amazon, I just put on subscribe, and then they come like once a month or every 2 months.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's in terms of Amazon, the most common form of retention, right? Rebuying, is the subscribe and save feature. Um, so I think that, Caroline, I'd like to get your thoughts on that from a retailer brick and mortar side of it, right? But it's also very dependent on the category and what type of product you have. Is your product repurchasable or not? But that does play a huge play into long-term longevity of selling on Amazon as well, right? I mean, that should be, if you have a product that is repurchasable and you do get into the subscribe and save program, like that should be your focus, is getting subscribe and save, savers, right? Instead of just these one-time purchases, because again, that's how you're going to increase your AOV. That's how you're actually going to build community through people that are buying it more than once, right?
Yeah. Just to add on from the retail perspective, again, it's a chicken and the egg situation. We
Yeah.
can talk about it. Community is equated to demand, right? If you have a community, you have demand. And it's a chicken and egg situation, right? I think that when it comes to retail, Hunter, you mentioned that Amazon is not a demand creator. I think that's really important to think about in terms of retail as well. Retail is not a demand creator. If you already have a product that is not selling, it's just going into retail is not going to fix your sales. There's ways to hack community, right? We can see things like Khloe Kardashian's popcorn company. Ways to hack community is to build with somebody who has a pre-existing audience. There's a lot of creator-led brands that are being launched right now. But the other way to hack community is to create a really niche offering and solve a very niche problem with a repeated sort of routine product. I posted this about this a few weeks ago, but there's kind of two different products that really successfully scale within retail. One is a replacement product and one is a routine product. A replacement product is usually a better option that replaces an existing option. So for example, Siete Family Foods, they replaced the existing, for example, tortillas on shelf with a better option that was speaking to a very niche market that had a need that was unmet. A routine product, think about like any supplement brand, for example, or another example would be like Everyday Dose. They're creating a routine, or Mudwater would be another one. They're creating a routine around their product. That's one way to build community. And those are the types of products that usually do well, both in the subscription phases, but also within retail. So it's hard to think about this in broad terms too, but it's so hyper specific to the category of the product and how it's positioned, and like even the founder's vision for what they want to build.
Yeah, and to add on to that really quick as well, I think that's where an omni-channel approach becomes even more powerful as well, right? Because from an Amazon perspective, again, one of the reasons Amazon has this well-deserved black eye is the lack of customer data that you actually get from Amazon, right? Like you don't own those customers on Amazon. So it is important to realize, what is working, what your audience actually is on D2C, what it is retail, right? Because that's how you can then influence decision making for Amazon as well. Because we don't know who our ideal customer profile is necessarily on Amazon, right? So that's why it is important to know what your audience, what your ICP is for a customer off as well, because there's a really good chance that if it's working for you off of Amazon, that you can at least take pieces of that and apply it to your Amazon strategy to recoup kind of that community as well. And people trust Amazon so much. So if you can build in Amazon to your community as well, and not I mean, not to get too deep into it, but talking about cannibalization of your D2C and retail and stuff like that, that's where it really becomes powerful, especially then like when it comes to subscribe and save, and things like that.
And last question before we go into audience Q&A. Let's talk a little bit also about the agreements, the terms, the fees. Is there anything that, brands should have on their checklist? Anything that's outrageous, or, if you can share a little bit about standard terms and fees. I think, Hunter, you mentioned that Amazon fees are on the higher side compared to like retail, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's got their high fees that they take. They've got FBA fees, they've got referral fees, they've got advertising fees. You have to pay to ship it into them. So there's a myriad of fees associated with Amazon. Retail has their own fees as well, right? They've got their same margins they're still trying to hit. So, but as far as like actual agreements, I think Caroline's gonna have a lot more to add to this, and I will. But one thing that I saw Caroline's like face like smirk when you brought this up. I think one or two things, when I'm talking with brands that are kind of just getting into that scope of expanding beyond just e-com and D2C, is have map in place. Because Amazon, whether you like it or not, is scraping the web for pricing discrepancies as much as they possibly can, right? They're trying to make sure that you're not selling too high, too low on Amazon. So making sure that, any retailers, distributors that you're selling to, wholesalers that you're selling to are following map pricing and policy, right? Because if Amazon is an open marketplace, so having resellers is technically not against Amazon's terms of services, right? If anybody has a product, they can go sell it on Amazon. The question is if they can make a profit from it or not, right? Because how are they actually getting the profit or getting the product? So having authorized reseller agreements in any sort of contracts so that hey, we only work with authorized resellers. If XYB resellers start showing up on our listings, we're able to track who essentially sold them that inventory, those units, so that we can say, hey, we've got this agreement that we can actually contractually put against you to help control that, again, authorized seller versus not, right? Because Amazon allows it. We just need to do what we can in our capabilities to make sure that we don't let them do it. End my soapbox.
On the retail side, when it comes to fees and terms, okay, this is a super, super high level view. Again, the way that I like to think about retailers, they're kind of like their own little kingdoms. They all have different operating rules. They have all different structures. They're looking for different things. So this is really going to vary by the specific, especially chain retailer that you're approaching. However, we have to build for retail at the beginning, especially as you're scaling your brand in D2C, and specifically when it comes to pricing. The things that usually make or break brands that are scaling into retail comes down to the pricing, and if they've allocated enough margin and built enough value into their positioning, their product, their packaging to support a high enough price for them to actually make money at the end of the day. There's a lot of different tiers of pricing. Everybody wants a cut of the pie because, it's how CPG unfortunately works right now. You're going to have to consider distributor pricing. You're going to want to allocate anywhere between 15 to 25, sometimes even 30%, depending on the scale of distributor you're looking to work with. You're going to want to consider broker pricing. So in your margin, you want to have at least a 5 to 10% margin for broker commission. You're going to also want to consider at least a 60% margin, 50% margin for the retailer as well. Again, that varies by category, it varies by level of retailer, but anywhere between, I would say, 45 is competitive to 60%. It depends on the type of category outside in food and beverage, within, home goods, et cetera. And then the other thing that a lot of brands tend to forget in when they're building out their pricing strategy is also trade spend. Trade spend is going to be a lot of where the majority of your margin over time goes. I typically advise brands to at least have 25% of their margin allocated to trade spend. So trade spend is going to include, especially within retail, things like in-store demos, promotions. It's going to include free fills. It's going to include any sort of marketing that you do for an individual product level to move product in store and or to get it on shelf. So either get it on shelf or get it off shelf. So that's a lot to kind of bake into your pricing, but it absolutely needs to be baked in before you start even pitching, because if you get on shelf and you don't have any margin, like at the end of the day, you have to build a business, and building a business means you have to be relatively profitable. There's some strategies, right? You have a lot of capital investment. There's a lot of brands that operate not at profitability, but at the end of the day, if you want to be a longevity brand in the market, there has to be some sort of plan for profitability built in prior to launching into all of these different channels. A very high level view.
And to add to that as well, really quick, one thing that I've started seeing a lot of brands doing to help differentiate pricing, because like I said, Amazon is scraping the web for prices. As any price they can get, they're going to compare to what you're selling it on Amazon. So what we started doing with some of our clients is, having specific SKUs that they sell only on Amazon, having specific SKUs that they only sell in Costco or to Target or so on and so forth, right? So that you have a little bit more separate control of your pricing and structure, stuff like that on Amazon, separate from, any sort of national retailer, regional retailer, things like that. That just gives you a little bit more flexibility as far as control and pricing. Because like Caroline said, there's a lot of factors to consider that you need to bake into your margins before you even start having these conversations with buyers to get into these chains, right?
This is a fantastic tip. Thank you, Hunter. That makes a lot of sense. Because I was wondering, like, I know that this brand has that product and it sells on Amazon, I think, for almost double compared to the website, right? And it makes a lot of sense that it's just a different school. It's like adjacent, but not the exact same formulation.
Yeah, and especially comparing Amazon to brick and mortar retailers. Typically what brands will do is sell the higher, let's use a supplement, for example. Let's say we have a 30-day and a 60 and a 90-day supplement. They'll typically sell that smaller margin product, or sorry, that smaller serving, so the 30 serving on Amazon, and save the larger serving for brick and mortar, right? Because they can work their margins a lot more, I guess, carefully when looking at that, right? But yeah, a lot of brands are starting to make specific SKUs specific by retailer, which I think is very smart, because again, it gives you a lot more control pricing, distribution wise, and so on and so forth. But that's a whole nother conversation in of itself.
That's fantastic. And I'm seeing that we already have a ton of questions from our audience. So I would suggest that we are shifting to that. Ben, do you have, I know you've been looking at it. Do you already have some priority questions?
Yeah. Let's start with this one, maybe for Caroline. So for early stage brands, how can you really test like retail interest without overcommitting resources? It's a huge game to play, and I'm sure it's very time consuming too. So how do you kind of start with that?
Oh gosh, okay. Let me think about this. When we think about strategies of how to enter retail, there's kind of two ways to sell into retail. So I got to preface my answer with this. There's a front door way to sell into retail, and there's a back door way to sell into retail. Front door is you're going to pitch to the buyer. Back door is you're having buyers come to you. So ways to test, especially for early stage brands, retailer interest is you either start pitching, especially to your local retailers, and or you get onto Fair. Fair is going to be, is like the Amazon for wholesale, basically, especially for independent retailers. If you can't get traction on Fair, there's probably, then we're going to have to look at the foundation of how you're building in retail. If there's no traction within and pickup within even local independent retailers, then that's another conversation about maybe you're not ready for retail with this specific product or this specific version of the product, or there's something in your pitch. When we think about backdoor, there's also ways to get backdoor interest. So backdoor interest is basically you get buyers to come to you. And this is a good indication, again, if you are ready for retail, if you have buyers coming to you. Ways to test backdoor interest is you start going to CPG events and you start sampling and getting feedback, right? If you have a buyer reaching out to you or wanting to learn more, that's a really good indication then that you are ready to start looking at retail as a sales channel. So bottom line, start with your local independents, expand the fair to see if there's more national level interest, and then start sampling and getting in touch with more industry level events to see if there's any more bigger buyer interest naturally for your product.
Yeah, that's great.
That's scrappy.
Awesome. Yeah, no, very good. Let's see what else.
I think we
So,
had, oh, sorry, Ben. I think we
go
had
ahead.
two questions on 3PLs. So I think we should answer one of these questions, right?
Let's talk a little bit about 3PL. So, um, here's one around, many of the 3PLs providers that we've spoken with immediately indicated that they don't want to work with Amazon. So identifying one that is open to partnering with Amazon has been a challenge. How do you kind of recommend managing stock, supply chain in that type of situation? Maybe for Hunter, a little bit on the Amazon side.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, again, when looking at, selling on Amazon, there's a few different ways to go about it. You can be a one-piece seller where Amazon is actually placing POs for your products. You're sending it to them. They're the seller of record on Amazon. Or there's the opposite where you're a third-party seller on Amazon, so you're responsible for, all everything as far as inventory as well, right? And I think why a lot of 3PL providers don't like necessarily working with Amazon, whether it's a 1P or a 3P relationship, is because they usually charge on like touch point basis, right? And when you're selling on Amazon, again, if you're utilizing FBA on Amazon, which 99% of the time you should be, unless you've got bulky products, heavy products, stuff like that, hazard products, stuff like that. Um, they're not making as much money by just receiving inventory, slapping a few labels on it, sending it right back out to Amazon, right? So I do think there are a lot of 3PLs that are more than willing to do it if they've also got some of your business on the D2C side, the wholesale side, um, pack side of it as well. But yeah, I think I actually started a 3PL a while ago as well, and it was that same thing, right? Like we did not make as much money from just receiving inventory, sending it out, right? Like we wanted as many touch points as we possibly could on each product because you charge at each touch point. So I don't think you need a 3PL to sell on Amazon, but it also depends on where you're at in your life cycle. But having a 3PL and having a partner like that from an Amazon perspective can be very beneficial, especially when you start getting into the conversation of returns and stuff like that. But not being in those actual conversations you're having with the 3PL, that's going to be my assumption is just they're kind of looking at you, and I don't know what your monthly demand is as well for order fulfillment and things like that. But I'm assuming they're just seeing not enough demand there, and they're just not going to make enough dollars for it to make sense for them for you to take up space in their warehouse. That's a huge assumption, though. So tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that makes total sense. Um, awesome. Yeah, let's get into, there's one here about, as consumers are really expecting more education at the shelf, how can brands deliver on that, when you don't have a sales associate, if you're not doing sampling in the store? Let's start with Caroline on this one for more of a brick and mortar approach, and then I'm sure Hunter has some insights for Amazon as well.
Okay, it starts with your packaging, right? And this is the key difference between scaling on B2C versus retail and physical retail. You don't have any surrounding information other than your packaging to sell your own product. So you need to build packaging that's going to stand out within the category you're going into, that communicates the exact like things that are going to make people very, very quickly, usually in less than 5 seconds, say, yes, I want to buy this. There's other ways you can educate. Again, it's very retailer specific. So methods would be, yes, they are demos. You need demos within retail, especially chain retail. Shelf talkers, shelf wobblers. Some retailers allow that, some retailers don't. You could do things like end caps. They're not going to be as education heavy focused. When you launch into a retailer, you usually want to go visit the store in person and talk to the people who are stocking the shelves and talking to the customers. Those are your sales associates. If you can build a good relationship with the people who actually work in the store, they're going to help promote your product to consumers. The other thing is really important to keep when you launch into retail, just like Susanne was saying, the first place that people are usually going to look, and especially with beauty and wellness products, they're going to go look at Amazon. So if your Amazon is not updated to educate and sell and doesn't have a high conversion rate on Amazon, right, that's not going to translate very well when somebody looks at your product within retail, takes a picture of it, searches it. So making sure that your collateral on the digital side is very updated is another way you can very easily educate within retail. That doesn't cost a lot of money generally. So hopefully you're making money from that side.
Yeah, I'll add on that as well. Again, I think this is another point where it's just synonymously beneficial to have both presences, right? Because you can learn more, you can learn some things about the product from physically holding it, looking at the product packaging. You can learn more about it on Amazon or a D2C site, right? Because you're able to actually put a lot more verbiage and product information on it, right? So I think the education level comes from all aspects. If somebody is in a store and holding your product, it's probably not the first time they've seen or heard of the brand as well. Probably. Obviously, it can be, but it's most likely not the first time they've seen or heard of the product. So they probably have something that they know about it. They just need those couple of extra nuggets to actually get them to convert and buy the product, right? So like Caroline said, it's important for the Amazon side of things to keep things updated because you can put a lot more information, educational aspects on your Amazon PDP than you can fit on product packaging, right? Because product packaging is a science in and of itself. You don't want to put anything and everything on the packaging, right? The package still has to sell, and sometimes selling versus education is not the same thing, right? So yeah, super important to kind of just have that multi-prong approach for education.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's great insights. This is an interesting one about influencers. So how critical are influencers today in building social proof? So given the amount, that almost every brand utilizes them, it's kind of become unclear whether this approach remains a differentiating factor. So how much do retailers care? Maybe Caroline, for you.
Guy, you're asking these broad questions. It's really hyper specific to the buyer.
Yeah.
It does matter. It does matter. But influencers ought to be part of your strategy before you go to retail. So there are a lot of interesting platforms that are coming out. Hummingbirds is a really great platform that helps you source local influencers and connect them to make content for in-store purchases. Influencers are important. I think the spend level you have on influencers, that strategy is adapting because over time, again, I don't work as much on the social media side with brands, but when it comes to retail, yes, it is an expectation that you're going to help sell and market this product when it launches it, especially in a new retailer. One of the easiest ways to do that is through influencers and influencers who either create specific content to that store. So they're like Target influencers, they're like Costco influencers. You want to contract them if you're launching into those stores, or UGC level influencers where they're going in and creating content. You own and promote that content on your own social channels to show your community, your audience that, hey, you can purchase this product now within this specific store. Does that answer the question?
I'll build on that as well. I work work a decent amount in the influencer space as well. I am part of the Amazon influencer program and stuff like that as well. And just like the question says, almost every brand is utilizing influencers, right? I think the word influencer and the category of influencers is changing every month, right? Six years ago, if you had an influencer, like that was fantastic, right? Nobody was really using influencers at that point. Now it's like it has to be part of your strategy to create that social proof, right? But more or less, I think it depends, or it's more important to know what kind of influencers you have working with your brand, right? Because nowadays it's not so much how big is your following, who are your influencers, what are their names, and is it celebrity, right? Joe from around the corner who's got 1,000 followers can be more influential than Kim Kardashian even could, depending on the product and brand, right? That might sound a little crazy, but it's true. If you find influencers and you work with influencers who actually resonate with your product, and the customers and their audience can actually resonate with the product, you fit that emotional demand, right? That's going to be way more powerful than again paying up the wazoo for a big name to just post a story about your product, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be reliant on influencers to help drive sales, because TikTok Shop is a good example of this, right? You have massive fluctuations that are going to happen in sales. So it brings a lot of vulnerability and uncertainty to forecasting as well. So again, I think influencers definitely need to be a part of your strategy. Don't completely rely on influencers, but there is definitely an importance, especially if we're talking about driving traffic to Amazon, right? Everything on Amazon is algorithm based. Every single unit sold on Amazon is extremely beneficial from a sales velocity standpoint. And Amazon actually gives you beneficial, they have what they call the brand referral program, where if you can attribute a sale coming from off of Amazon to Amazon, they'll actually rebate you a % of your referral fee back. So having influencers drive traffic from off of Amazon to Amazon actually, one, helps you get more sales, but two, actually helps you get a % of your margin back as a rebate. So yeah, I could talk about this forever.
All day.
All day.
Great. Well, before we go to the next and probably last question, I had no idea they had Target or Costco specific influencers. That's insane. And I can definitely vouch for what Hunter was saying about, an influencer can also be like a person next door with like 1,000, 2,000 followers. I actually bought stuff because someone in my community who apparently is an influencer, which I had no idea about, was advertising something in the pickleball world. So he is apparently a pickleball influencer, which I had no idea about. But like brands can, like very specific, like niche brands, like pickleball brands, right, can really like take off with people who have like 4,000, 5,000 followers.
Really quick, I think one of my favorite examples of that is, this is a few years ago, and I can't remember what his name is, but it was that guy, I think he was from California, who was riding a longboard and he was drinking ocean spray, like the cranberry juice. Literally, all he did was film himself with the ocean spray bottle that he just picked up from a gas station or whatever, and went completely viral. Ocean spray, like, couldn't even keep up with the demand. So it's like, those are the moments that you're trying to go after, right? That you can do with these very micro influencers, or people that don't even or want to be influencers, right? They're just genuinely posting about your product because they like it.
All right, Ben.
Yeah.
Pick the last question.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, let's do one more. So this one is around, how do you know when to transition from independent retail to regional stores and then to a national level? Are there any benchmarks to consider? Again, Caroline, I know this is going to be a very case by case basis, I'm sure, but any insights there?
Yeah. I think it first starts with supply, right? Can you keep up with production demand with your current channels? And do you have a plan for scaling production with more distribution and more demand and inventory. One very simple one is, has a retailer approached you? That usually means you're doing something right, especially if it's like a local chain, set of chain stores that has approached you. Then you have a buyer who's going to work with you and kind of nurture your growth. I think this is what makes omnichannel so difficult. It's not a chicken or an egg question. It's kind of an all at once question. But it's all at once strategically, right? Yes, you do need independence, but at the same time as you're growing your independence, and once you're about, I would say like 5 to 10K per month in independent retailers, then I would start looking at larger chain retailers, especially local chain retailers that you can source and service near to where you live as a founder. Once you've mastered that level, right, then it's about having conversations with bigger buyers and bigger retailers and bigger distributors. So 2 kind of rules of thumb: has a buyer approached you? Can you actually scale the production side of this and the operation side of this and the inventory? Do you have cash flow to support if you're not going to make any money from retail in the first few months up to a year? And then, yeah, can you service it? Do you understand this channel? There's a lot of things that go into that. And again, yes, it is a very case by case basis. But Hunter, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts, on your end. That's a much more retail specific question.
Yeah. Oh, that's hard to answer. But again, I'll just kind of ream in on the inventory side of it. Because, I have brands that come to me every once in a while and they're like, yeah, our goal is to get to 150K a month on Amazon. And I'm like, great. So that's about just under $2 million a year. That's great. I think, what I know about you, we're going to get there. What does your inventory look like? We dive into it and it's like, well, you don't even have enough inventory to even sell $2 million worth of inventory, let alone half of that, right? So I think to bring it a little more full circle, it's trying to predict like, okay, once we make this move, what is going to inherently change financially, operationally, marketing wise, team wise, and really just trying to predict. Because again, if you're going from independent retailers to national level retailers, like their demand is going to increase. Your knowledge of your product and being able to sell your product to them is going to increase. So I don't know. That's I feel about all I can add on that conversation, because I've never actually, directly helped a brand go get into national retailers, right? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Oh, I think that's a great. Oh, sorry. Go
Can
ahead,
I just add in one
Caroline.
last thing?
Yeah.
I think that, right, to scale to different levels within CPG, it requires a different mindset, right?
100%.
And I think we can equate mindset to scale and size of retailer, especially very nicely on the retail side. The mindset you have to scale with an independence is very different from the mindset in regional chain retailer, is very different from the mindset with a national retailer. And there's going to be like growing pains along the way, especially if you've not navigated a brand previously into retail. There's going to be growing pains along the way that are, just part of the initiation as you scale something in this market right now.
Yep.
Well, fantastic. Thank you both for joining us today. It was really a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And to our audience, I hope this was super helpful. And please reach out to Hunter and Caroline if you have any more questions. And Caroline, where and how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions that were answered. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn. My email address is also here, or at productandprosper.com. And I'd be happy to chat with anyone.
Great. Hunter, what about you?
Yeah, same. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. You can find me just using my name there. Like Caroline said, I noticed some Amazon specific questions that weren't answered as well. So I'm a pretty open book. Reach out to me, ask the questions. I don't try to gatekeep anything. I'm just genuinely here trying to help people make the right decisions and help your brands grow.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both again. And everyone, thank you so much for listening in. And I hope to see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you. See ya.